Okay, so now we're going to get ready to sew the strap onto one of the squares for the cushion. So I've just got this one here just to show you what it will look like at the end. So I'm going to place my square, making sure the right side of the square is facing the strap. And I'm just going to place it probably just under the edge, the end of the Velcro there. Alright, and then we're going to flip it over, making sure your square and your fabric doesn't move too much. Okay, and then I'm just going to pin it in place, and I'm kind of going to use the pins as a guide for how long or how far to sew up the top stitched edge on the strap. So I'm going to make it probably about a 1.5 by 1.5 square. So I'm just going to estimate a bit here, guesstimate. About there. Okay, so when I take it over to the sewing machine now, I'm going to be stitching up along the top stitch edge. When I get to this pin, I'm going to stitch across, up this top stitched edge, and across where this pin is here. So you'll have a stitched square. Okay, so now we're ready to stitch the strap onto one of the squares of the cushion. So what I'm going to do is line up the top stitched line that we sewed for the strap, and just make sure the needle goes down onto that line, and sew a couple of stitches and then do a reverse stitch. And then when I get to the needle, or the pin, sorry, and take it out, pivot my fabric, and then sew to the other top stitch line there. Back stitch, reverse stitch there to secure it in place. Okay, just need to trim the threads, and then we're ready for the next bit. Okay, so before we sew the two squares together, we need to gather up the strap, and then as best you can try and pin it down. On the side. Okay. And then once that's done, we're going to place the other square over the top. We need to make sure we have right sides facing. I'm going to just pin the corners just to hold it all together in place. Okay, and then on one of the edges we need to leave an opening, so I'm going to mark that with double pins, and I like to usually leave my opening so it will be on one of these sides of the pin cushion, and it's probably good to leave the opening so it's about 1.5 to 2 inches wide. pin down there. Just making sure the edges are lining up. Okay, then we're ready to take that over to the sewing machine to sew. Okay, so now we're ready to sew around the edge of the cushions. So I'm going to be sewing this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to start at the bottom lot of the double pins that we put in there. Okay, so press a foot down, needle down, and do a reverse stitch just to reinforce the end of the opening there. And when you're about 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge there, make sure your needle's down. You can pivot your fabric. Okay. Now just be careful when you're sewing around the edges to make sure that the edges of the fabric stay together as best as you can, because sometimes having this big lump in between can force the top fabric to pull up a bit. Okay, so we're back around to our next double lot of pins, so that tells us it's time to reverse stitch and finish off. And there you have it. We're ready for the next part. Okay, so now what we need to do is snip these threads off first. A little bin. And then using your fabric scissors, snip the corners off. Okay, and then before we turn it right side out, we just need to remove those pins that we put in on the inside, if you can find them. Okay, and then you can pull the strap out. And as you're doing that as well, just turn your cushion right side out. And then with your stuffing tool or chopstick or pencil, whatever you're using, just get it into those corners there and push them right out. Okay. And then what I like to do next is just give it a press with the iron and just make sure you have these edges folded in, and then when you iron that, that will give you kind of like a guideline for when you do your ladder stitch to close up the opening.